You've had a tough life. I read quite a bit about you, and do you have any scars anywhere? Have you been maimed in the years that you've...
I saw that film clip of Winston Churchill.
Yeah.
Now, there was a boy living a tough life.
Even though he had a great deal
No
of money.
scars, nothing, but they're there, you know.
Yeah.
That's a tough life as well.
Rumor had it that Charles Bronson carried his dead wife everywhere he went. For years, most people dismissed it as another Hollywood myth. But after his death, the people closest to him confirmed the truth. And that was only the beginning. Most fans remember Charles as the stone-faced action star who rarely smiled and made silence more intimidating than dialogue. But there's more to him than that. Now, the people who knew him best are revealing the man behind the legend, and the truth is far more surprising than the movies ever were. How did one of Hollywood's toughest men end up living a life far more extraordinary than any role he ever played? Join us as we uncover Charles Bronson's daughter's shocking revelations. The kid from the coal mine. Years before he became Hollywood's ultimate tough guy, Charles Bronson was simply Charles Dennis Bukinski, one of 15 children raised by Lithuanian immigrants in Ehrenfeld, Pennsylvania. His family lived in a tiny cold water shack, just steps from the coal tracks, where the rumble of mine trains was a daily reminder that survival, not fame, was the only future anyone expected. His family slept in shifts because there were not enough beds for 15 children. English was not spoken at home. He grew up speaking Lithuanian, Russian, and Greek, and his accent was so thick that when he enlisted in the United States Army Air Forces during World War II, his fellow soldiers assumed he was a foreigner. In a 1973 interview, he said he did not know his father very well and was not sure if he loved or hated him. All he could remember, he said, was that whenever his mother announced his father was coming home, the children would hide. His father died of cancer when Charles was 10 years old. By 16, Charles was in the mines himself, working double shifts to earn $1 a week. He was paid $1 per ton of coal. He and his brother engaged in removing stumps from mine roofs, one of the most dangerous jobs in the industry, because the pay was slightly better than the alternatives. Cave-ins were common. He came out of those years with a claustrophobia that stayed with him for the rest of his life, and that he used directly when playing a character trapped underground in The Great Escape. The fear in that film was not performed. His family was so poor during the Great Depression that his mother could not afford milk for his younger sister and gave her warm tea instead. On the morning he went to school, wearing one of his sister's dresses because he had no clothes of his own that were fit to wear, the lesson he absorbed about poverty and humiliation was the kind that does not fade. It becomes the bedrock of a personality. It explains why the man he became had no interest in the social performance of Hollywood, and why he spent his entire career playing characters who said almost nothing and meant everything they said. He left the mines in 1943 to serve in the U.S. Army Air Forces, eventually flying 25 combat missions as a Boeing B-29 Superfortress aerial gunner with the 61st Bombardment Squadron based in Guam. He received the Purple Heart after being wounded during one of those missions. After the war, a friend mentioned to him that actors earned $75 a week. He had been earning $1 a ton in the mines. He decided immediately that acting was a viable income source. He enrolled at the Pasadena Playhouse, where his thick Pennsylvania accent was mocked by instructors and where a teacher who saw past that connected him with director Henry Hathaway, resulting in his first film debut in You're in the Navy, Now in 1951. He was 30 years old at the time and was starting from nothing for the second time in his life. On his first date with Harriet Tendler, the woman who would become his first wife, he had 4 cents in his pocket. That boy, who had been paid $1 per a ton of coal later, became one of the highest-paid actors in the world. The distance between those two data points is the whole story of who Charles Bronson was before he became the Charles Bronson the world thinks it knows. So the man with the dangerous stare came from dangerous poverty. But what about the rumors that have surrounded him for years? About his personality on set, about the way he treated people, and about the marriage that defined the second half of his life? Because his daughter has confirmed some things that change how you see all of it. The man nobody could figure out. Charles Dennis Bukinski became Charles Bronson in 1954 after his agent pushed for the change. The Red Scare was at its height, and an Eastern European name was considered commercially damaging in the political climate of that era. The name Bronson came, reportedly, from the Bronson Gate at Paramount Studios on Bronson Avenue in Los Angeles. He had already appeared in supporting roles in Machine Gun Kelly, House of Wax, and a string of television westerns including Bonanza, Big Valley, Gunsmoke, and Rawhide throughout the 1950s. In 1952, he had even boxed in a show with Roy Rogers. He was building a career brick by brick, taking whatever was available, while simultaneously being too specific a presence to slot easily into the conventional leading man categories that the studio system used to organize its talent. He did not look like a matinee idol. He looked, as one film critic put it, like a Clark Gable who had been left out in the sun too long. Off-screen, the picture that colleagues and journalists assembled across his career was of a man who was fundamentally shy, who preferred solitude, who retreated to his Vermont farm to escape Hollywood's social requirements, and who had, as he told one interviewer in 1972, no particular interest in talking very much. He had no friends. Roger Ebert wrote in 1974 that Charles did not volunteer information, did not elaborate, and had no theories about his films. He also wrote that Charles threatened to get Time magazine critic Jay Cox, who had written a negative review that Charles viewed as a personal attack, and that unlike other actors who projected violence on film, Charles seemed violent in person. Jill Ireland, his second wife, made a joke that captured the on-set reality of working with him better than any serious description could. "I'm in so many Charles Bronson films because no other actress will work with him." The people who worked with him consistently described a paradox. He was difficult, private, and apparently indifferent to whether the people around him liked him. He was also, when it mattered to him personally, capable of a devotion so complete and so sustained that it reshaped everything else around it. The gap between those two descriptions is where the real Charles Bronson lived. And the person who got inside that gap was not a director or a producer or a co-star. She was someone else's wife. So, how did she become his? The woman he stole. The story of how Charles Bronson met Jill Ireland is the kind that, if you put it in a film, audiences would call it unrealistically direct. He met her in 1963 on the set of The Great Escape, where her husband David McCallum was also appearing. Charles looked at Jill, looked at David, and told David directly, "I'm going to marry your wife." Jill was an English actress born in Hounslow, West London, in 1936. She had been married to David since 1957, and they had children together. She was beautiful, warm, and by all accounts genuinely happy in her life when Charles made his announcement. David and Jill separated in 1965 and divorced in 1967. Interestingly, Charles and Jill married a year after the divorce. The story of how that transition happened is one that the people involved kept private during their lifetimes, and that director Michael Winner eventually disclosed after both Charles and Jill were gone. Michael, who directed Charles in multiple films, had himself been in a relationship with Jill before she married McCallum. According to Michael, he and Jill were also together when she married Charles. Michael kept the secret until 10 years after Charles died in 2003. Jill had asked him not to let Charles know about their affair. Michael honored that request through her life and through Charles's life, and disclosed it only after both of them were gone. What David said publicly about the situation decades later in 2016 was that he had been in a very difficult period and that the divorce had caused him significant pain. He was particularly affected by the custody of his children, who went with Jill. He said he did not hold a grudge. Whether or not that was completely true, what the historical record shows is that the three people most affected by Charles's announcement on that film set spent the following decades managing its consequences. Charles and Jill built something together that nobody who observed them described as anything other than complete. They appeared together in 16 films. They raised a family of 7 children, including 2 of their own, in a Bel Air mansion in Los Angeles. They had a colonial farmhouse in Vermont, where Jill raised horses. They spent winters in Snowmass, Colorado. He called her his reason for everything. She called him her life. She joked publicly that she appeared in his films because no other actress would work with him, which was her way of saying the same thing from the other direction. And then, in 1984, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. And the man who had spent his career playing invulnerable men had to learn something about vulnerability that the mines and the war and the poverty had never required of him. The ashes in the walking cane. Jill Ireland was diagnosed with breast cancer in 1984. She underwent a mastectomy. She wrote 2 books about her experience, Life Wish, a personal story of survival and lifelines, My Fight to Save My Family. She became an advocate for the American Cancer Society and received its Courage Award, presented to her by President Ronald Reagan. She fought the disease for 6 years. The cancer came back with greater severity in 1989. Their adopted son, Jason McCallum, died of an accidental drug overdose the same year, at the age of 27. 1989 was a year that broke Charles Bronson in ways that the public never fully saw. He lost a child who had been part of his family for more than 2 decades. He watched his wife's illness return at a level that treatment could no longer contain. He kept showing up to work because that was what he knew how to do. The films he made in that period, the later Death Wish sequels, and the television movies carried none of the energy that had made him famous. He looked like a man going through motions while something more important was happening elsewhere. Jill Ireland died on May 18, 1990, at their home in Malibu, California. She was 54 years old. Charles Bronson was beside her when she died. What he did afterward is the detail that his daughter Katrina and others in his family have confirmed across various accounts. He had a custom walking cane built with a hollow interior. He placed Jill Ireland's ashes inside the cane. He used that cane for the rest of his life, carrying her with him everywhere he went, until he died in 2003. The cane was buried with him at Brownsville Cemetery in Vermont. Katrina Holden Bronson is the adopted daughter of Charles Bronson and Jill Ireland, born in 1968, whose birth mother was Hilary Holden, a close friend of the couple who was an English casting director. Katrina went on to become a film director and screenwriter herself, making her directorial debut with Daltrey Calhoun in 2005. She has been one of the family members most willing to speak about her father across the years since his death. And what she has confirmed about the man she knew is consistently at odds with the public image of the stone-faced tough guy who never showed weakness on screen. The cane with the ashes is the rumor that had circulated in Charles's inner circle for years before it was confirmed by people close to him. The image of a man who made his career playing characters with nothing to lose, carrying his dead wife's ashes inside a walking stick for 13 years, is the image that sits directly underneath the leather jacket and the squinting stare and tells you who he actually was. The walking stick revealed the man behind the legend. His career made him an icon, but the story didn't end there. In fact, the most heartbreaking chapter of Charles Bronson's life was still to come. The tragedy of the final years. After Jill Ireland died in 1990, Charles Bronson worked as long as his body allowed. He continued making films through the 1990s, primarily for television. His final film role was in the TV series Family of Cops. He underwent hip replacement surgery in August 1998. The physical decline that the surgery addressed was one of several simultaneous health challenges he was managing by that point. In December 1998, he married for the third time. Kim Weeks had been a former actress who had worked in the production of Jill Ireland's audiobooks at Dove Audio, the company that produced Jill's recorded memoirs. The connection to Jill was not incidental. The woman Charles chose to marry after Jill was someone who had been part of Jill's final professional work, who had been present in that specific orbit during a period of immense grief. Weeks was married to him until his death in 2003. The diagnosis that effectively ended his public life was Alzheimer's disease. The condition took hold in his final years and removed the cognitive clarity that had always been the quiet engine underneath the physical presence. Charles Bronson, who had said in 1972 that he simply did not like to talk very much, was now robbed of the ability to communicate by a disease that is among the cruelest available, precisely because it dismantles the person before removing them. He died on August 30th, 2003, at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles, from pneumonia secondary to Alzheimer's disease. He was 81 years old. He was survived by Kim Weeks and 6 children: Suzanne, Tony, Katrina, Zuleika, Paul, and Val McCallum. He was buried at Brownsville Cemetery in Vermont on the farm property that had been part of his life with Jill Ireland. So, what did his daughter reveal, and what impact does it have on his legacy? His daughter's confirmation. The rumors that have surrounded Charles Bronson since his death have accumulated across 2 decades of YouTube videos, tabloid retrospectives, and celebrity biography content that tends to emphasize the most dramatic available version of any story. The ones that circulate most consistently are about his personality on set, his treatment of co-workers, the question of whether the tough guy persona was performance or reality, and the specifics of his personal life that he spent his entire career refusing to discuss publicly. Katrina Holden Bronson, his adopted daughter with Jill Ireland, has over the years provided the clearest window into the private version of Charles Bronson that the films never showed. She has confirmed the walking cane story and the depth of his devotion to Jill, which went beyond what even people who watched them work together across 16 films had fully understood from the outside. Zuleika Bronson, his biological daughter with Jill, has been known primarily for her philanthropic work and has maintained a substantially more private life than Katrina. She has not pursued entertainment professionally and has kept details of her personal life largely away from the public eye. What both daughters' accounts, taken together with the accounts of people who worked with him, confirm about the rumors is this. Charles Bronson was not easy to work with. He was not warm with people he did not trust or did not care about. He had no interest in performing friendliness as a social obligation. He held his private life close in a way that went beyond normal celebrity privacy and reflected the specific psychology of someone who had learned early that warmth was a resource to be conserved for the people who mattered rather than distributed broadly. But the things he kept that warmth for, he kept with a ferocity that the screen persona never suggested was present underneath it. The woman he decided he was going to marry in 1963 stayed with him until 1990. and then continued to stay with him inside a walking cane until 2003. This pattern is not that of a man who felt nothing. It is that of a man who felt everything quietly and directed it with precision at the specific people and places that had earned it. Which revelation about Charles Bronson surprised you the most? The cane, the coal mine, the dress he wore to school, or the moment he stunned David McCallum on set? After hearing his story, do you see Charles Bronson differently? Not just as Hollywood's toughest star, but as one of its most quietly devoted men? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.